As Emily settled into the grand lobby of the Oak Ridge Hotel, she couldn't help but admire the luxurious surroundings. The marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of the crystal chandeliers, and the rich scent of fresh flowers filled the air. She felt a sense of pride in being here, a keynote speaker at the Leadership in Action conference, an event she had been eagerly anticipating for months. Her bright turquoise dress stood out against the muted tones of the lobby, and she adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase as she took in the ambiance. Emily knew that she belonged here, and the confidence she carried with her was evident in every step she took. David Harrison, the hotel manager, watched her from across the lobby. He had spent years perfecting the art of running a luxury hotel, and everything about the Oak Ridge reflected his high standards. From the meticulous arrangement of the flowers to the precision with which the staff operated, the Oak Ridge was a testament to his life's work. But as he watched Emily, something inside him tightened. She didn't fit the image he had carefully cultivated for the Oak Ridge. Her vibrant dress, her confident stride, and the way she carried herself, everything about her seemed to challenge the world he had worked so hard to create. David couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was different from the usual guests. His gaze followed her as she moved across the lobby, noting how she engaged with the other guests, smiling warmly and speaking with ease. There was an air of grace about her, but also a strength that made David uneasy. He had grown up in a world where people looked and acted a certain way, and those early experiences had shaped his view of who belonged in places like the Oak Ridge. Emily, with her vibrant presence, didn't fit that mold. As the afternoon wore on, David found himself unable to focus on his work. He kept glancing at Emily, watching her every move. His mind raced with thoughts he couldn't fully understand. Why did she make him feel so unsettled? Why did her presence in his hotel bother him so much? These questions swirled in his head, fueling his discomfort. Emily, on the other hand, was unaware of the turmoil she was causing in David's mind. She was too busy preparing for her keynote address, going over her notes in the quiet of her hotel room. The Oak Ridge was everything she had expected: luxurious, elegant, and a perfect setting for the conference. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel's manager, David, was watching her closely. There was something about his demeanor that made her feel uneasy, like he was judging her for reasons she couldn't quite pinpoint. The next morning, as Emily made her way to the conference hall, she passed by David, who was standing near the reception desk. He watched her closely, his eyes narrowing as she walked by. Emily offered him a polite smile, but David's return smile was tight, forced. It was clear that something about her presence was bothering him, but Emily chose to ignore it, focusing instead on the task at hand. She had a speech to deliver, and she wasn't about to let anything distract her from that. David, however, couldn't let it go. Throughout the day, he kept tabs on Emily, watching her interactions with the other guests, scrutinizing her every move. The more he observed her, the more convinced he became that she didn't belong at the Oak Ridge. He began to question how she had even gotten a reservation in the first place. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them favorable. Was she really here for the conference, or was there something else going on? As the day turned into evening, David's discomfort grew. He decided that he needed to confront Emily, to find out what she was really doing at the Oak Ridge. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow disrupting the carefully maintained order of his hotel. With his mind made up, David approached Emily as she stood in the lobby, chatting with a group of conference attendees. "Excuse me, Miss Williams," he said, his voice carrying an edge of suspicion. Emily turned to face him, her expression calm but curious. "I hope you're finding everything satisfactory," David continued, though his tone suggested that he expected the opposite. Emily studied him for a moment before responding. She could sense the underlying tension in his words, the way he was scrutinizing her as if searching for a flaw. "Everything has been wonderful, thank you," she replied, her tone polite but firm. She wasn't about to let David's attitude rattle her. But David wasn't satisfied with her response. He felt an irrational need to push further, to find something, anything that would justify his unease. "I just want to make sure that all our guests are comfortable," he added, the words laced with a subtle hint of doubt. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the true meaning behind his words. She had encountered people like David before, people who judged others based on appearances, who couldn't see past their own prejudices. But Emily was not one to back down. She had worked hard to get where she was, and she wasn't about to let someone like David make her feel unwelcome. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Harrison," Emily replied, her voice steady, "but I assure you I'm more than comfortable here." With that, she turned her attention back to the group she had been speaking with, effectively ending the conversation. David stood there, feeling a mix of frustration and confusion. He couldn't understand why Emily's presence bothered him so much. But he knew one thing: something about her was different, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. As he walked away, he couldn't help but feel that this encounter was far from over. Emily had challenged his beliefs in a way that no one else had before, and it left him questioning everything he thought he knew about who belonged in his world. Emily smiled at Mr. Anderson and said, "Yes, thank you, Mr. Anderson. The hotel is lovely." Mr. Anderson nodded but looked nervous. Then he said, "I noticed you're here. Are you sure there's no mistake with your reservation?" Emily raised her eyebrows a little but stayed calm. She said, "I'm sure there's no mistake. I'm here for the Leadership in Action conference as the keynote speaker." Mr. Anderson looked surprised for a moment, but then acted normal again. "I see," he said. "It's just that our guests are usually, well, of a certain kind." The lobby got quiet as other guests started watching them. Emily stood up straighter and said, "What kind of guests do you mean, Mr. Anderson?" Mr. Anderson started to stammer, realizing he was saying something wrong. "I just meant that our guests are usually, well, successful and accomplished," he said. Emily looked at him steadily and said, "I assure you, Mr. Anderson, I meet all those criteria and more." The air in the lobby felt tense as people whispered and looked at Emily and Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson's face turned red with embarrassment and anger, but he didn't want to back down. "Miss Williams," he said loudly, "I'm afraid I need to see proof of your reservation and your role in the conference. We've had problems with fraud before." Emily looked surprised and hurt. "Excuse me?" she said, trying to stay calm. Mr. Anderson continued, "It's not uncommon for people to try to take advantage of our hotel. I'm just doing my job to protect the Oak Ridge Hotel." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Guests stopped to watch, and the staff looked worried. Emily took a deep breath and said, "Mr. Anderson, there's no fraud here. I have my confirmation email and ID." She reached for her phone, but Mr. Anderson waved her off. "Anyone can fake an email," he said. "I find it hard to believe someone like you is the keynote speaker at our hotel." The lobby gasped, and Emily's face turned red with shame, but she didn't back down. "Someone like me? I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Anderson, but I can assure you," Mr. Anderson interrupted her, his voice loud. "I'm saying you don't belong here. This is a high-class hotel, and we have standards." The lobby got very quiet. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her voice strong. "You're being prejudiced, Mr. Anderson. I've never been so insulted in my life." The crowd started to murmur with disapproval. Some guests shook their heads while others looked away, uncomfortable. The staff looked nervous, not liking what their manager was doing, but Mr. Anderson, blinded by his arrogance, couldn't see how much harm he was causing. He stood there, proud, convinced he was right. Mr. Anderson's face hardened as he made up his mind. He turned to the front desk and shouted, "Call security now!" The young receptionist hesitated, looking scared, But under Mr. Anderson's stern glare, she picked up the phone with trembling hands. Emily's heart sank. She couldn't believe this was happening. "Please," she said, her voice shaking, "there's no need for this. I have my reservation right here." She fumbled with her phone, trying to show the email, but Mr. Anderson wouldn't listen. He crossed his arms and glared at Emily. "Save your excuses. Security will escort you out." In a few minutes, two big security guards in dark uniforms came into the lobby. They walked up to Emily with serious faces. "This woman needs to be removed," Mr. Anderson said, his voice full of disdain. Emily felt everyone watching her, the shame burning in her chest. She looked around, hoping someone would speak up, but everyone just watched in silence. "I'm telling you, there's been a mistake," Emily said, her voice cracking. She held out her phone to the guards. "Look, here's my reservation. I'm supposed to be here." One of the guards glanced at the screen and then looked at Mr. Anderson, who shook his head. "It could be fake. I want her out." Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back, determined not to cry in front of these people. "This is wrong," she whispered, barely loud enough to be heard. The guards gently but firmly took hold of her arms. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," one of them said as they led her toward the exit. Emily felt powerless. She had done nothing wrong, but here she was being treated like a criminal. The injustice made her want to scream, but she held her head high, refusing to let Mr. Anderson see her break down. Just before they reached the door, Emily turned back to Mr. Anderson. "You're making a terrible mistake," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "One day, you'll realize just how wrong you were." With those words, Emily was escorted out of the Oak Ridge Hotel, leaving behind a lobby full of stunned onlookers and a smug Mr. Anderson. As Emily was being led out, an older gentleman in a sharp suit stood up from his seat in the lobby. His eyes were filled with disbelief and anger as he watched the scene unfold. This was Mr. Harrison, a well-known philanthropist and regular guest at the Oak Ridge Hotel. Mr. Harrison had been quietly watching the whole incident, his frown growing deeper with every moment. He recognized Emily Parker right away. David sat on the edge of his bed, his head buried in his hands, feeling the weight of his mistakes. His bedroom was eerily quiet, with only the soft hum of his phone vibrating beside him. The phone, once a tool for communication, now served as a stark reminder of how quickly his world had crumbled. The social media feeds were ablaze with angry comments and news about what he had done. Each notification felt like another blow, another nail in the coffin of his career. "What have I done?" he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. The realization of how badly he had messed up hit him like a punch to the stomach. All the hard work he had put into his job, all the years spent climbing the ranks, were now at risk because he couldn't see past his own prejudices. His once promising career in the hotel industry seemed to be slipping through his fingers, and he was left wondering if he would ever have a chance to work in a hotel again. The thought of starting over from scratch at his age was overwhelming and made him feel physically sick. He picked up his phone, scrolling through the endless stream of angry comments and news articles about the incident. Each comment, each article seemed to add more weight to his already heavy heart. The hashtag #OakHotelRacism was trending, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of discrimination and condemning David's actions. The negative attention was suffocating, and David felt a deep sense of shame and regret wash over him. The job he had worked so hard to secure and maintain was now in jeopardy, all because he couldn't see past his own biases. "I have to fix this," David muttered to himself as he paced his small apartment. But how could he fix something so broken? He thought about reaching out directly to Emily Parker to apologize. But would that make things worse? Would she even want to hear from him after what he had done? The thought of facing her again filled him with an overwhelming sense of shame, but he knew he had to do something. Sitting around feeling sorry for himself wouldn't solve anything. David grabbed a notebook from his desk and began jotting down ideas. Maybe if he could show that he was truly sorry and willing to change, there might be a chance to salvage his career. But deep down, he wondered if anyone would believe him. Would they see his efforts as a genuine attempt to make amends, or would they view it as a desperate attempt to save face? As the night wore on, David's desperation grew. He needed to find a way to make things right, not just for his career, but because it was the right thing to do. The question was where to begin. His thoughts raced as he tried to come up with a plan. He knew that simply apologizing might not be enough. He needed to demonstrate real change and a commitment to addressing his prejudices. But how could he show that he was sincere? The next morning, David's phone rang, jolting him awake from a restless sleep. His heart raced as he fumbled for the device, seeing an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. With trembling fingers, he answered the call. "Hello," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mr. Anderson, this is Emily Parker," came the calm but firm voice on the other end of the line. David's breath caught in his throat. Emily Parker, the woman he had wronged so badly. "Miss Williams, I'm so sorry for," David began, his voice breaking. "Please let me speak," Emily interrupted, her tone both composed and assertive. "What happened yesterday was unacceptable, but I believe in second chances." David's heart sank. He had expected her to be angry or dismissive, but her words offered a glimmer of hope. She was willing to listen. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "I understand if you're still upset," David said, his voice filled with regret. "I know I made a terrible mistake. I was wrong to judge you based on your appearance, and I'm deeply sorry for how you were treated." Emily's voice softened slightly, though it remained firm. What happened was not just a mistake. It was a reflection of a deeper issue. "I appreciate your apology, but it's important that you understand the impact of your actions and take real steps to change." David nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I understand. I want to make things right. I'm committed to learning from this and addressing my biases. I'm also willing to support any initiatives or programs that promote equality and justice." There was a pause on the line, and David could almost hear Emily weighing his words. "It's a start," she said finally. I believe in the possibility of change, but it will take time and consistent effort. Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Anderson." David agreed wholeheartedly. "Thank you for giving me this chance. I will do everything in my power to prove that I can change and make amends for what I've done." As the conversation ended, David felt a mix of relief and anxiety. He knew that regaining his reputation and proving his commitment to change would be a long and challenging journey. But Emily's willingness to offer a second chance gave him a glimmer of hope. He hung up the phone with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew he had to start by taking concrete steps to address his prejudices and contribute to meaningful change. He made a plan to get involved with local organizations dedicated to social justice and began researching training programs on diversity and inclusion. David was determined to show that he was genuinely sorry and committed to becoming a better person. The road ahead would be difficult, but David was ready to face the challenges and work towards redemption. As he looked out of his apartment window, he took a deep breath and resolved to make the most of this second chance. David felt very surprised as Emily spoke. Instead of taking legal action, she said, "I have a different idea. I want you to help out at the Oakwood Community Center in my neighborhood 3 days a week for a month." David was confused. "Why should I do that?" he asked. Emily replied, "You need to learn about the lives of people you judge too quickly. This is your chance to understand and care." David was nervous, but agreed, thinking it might be his only chance to make things right. He spent the rest of the day worried about what would happen at the community center and how people would treat him. The next morning, David stood outside the Oakwood Community Center. His shiny shoes looked out of place on the cracked sidewalk. The building was simple, with peeling paint and an old sign. He felt uncomfortable in his fancy suit. He took a deep breath and walked inside. The center was clean but old, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in kids' artwork. It smelled of coffee and cleaning products. A friendly woman in her 50s, named Linda, approached him. "You must be David. Emily told us you'd be coming. I'm Linda, the director." David nodded, saying, "Yes, I'm here to volunteer." Linda smiled and said, "We're happy to have you. Let me show you around." As they walked, Linda pointed out different areas of the center: a food pantry, a tutoring room, and a job skills center. David was amazed by how much the center did for people. Linda then showed him a small office. "This is where you'll help me with paperwork and scheduling. We have a tight budget, so every bit of help is important." David saw the old computer and piles of papers and felt out of place compared to his fancy hotel office. Linda noticed he seemed uncomfortable. She said, "I know this is new for you, but give it a chance. You might learn something valuable." David walked into the busy after-school room. Kids of all ages were playing and doing homework. It was noisy and very different from his quiet hotel. Linda guided him to a table where kids were coloring thank you cards. "Help these kids with their art project," she said. David approached the table hesitantly. "Hello, kids," he said quietly. A little girl asked, "Are you a businessman?" David replied, "Yes, I am." Another child asked for help with a drawing. David tried to color but felt awkward. He hadn't colored in a long time. "I'm not sure I'm good at this," he said as he tried to help. The kids were messy and David felt frustrated. They didn't listen to him, and one boy spilled water on the table. David jumped back and said, "Oh, for heaven's sake." Linda quickly cleaned up and told the boy it was okay. David was surprised by Linda's calmness and felt out of place. As the days went by, David started to notice more about the people at the center. He heard mothers talking about their struggles with money. One woman said she couldn't pay rent, and another talked about choosing between food and medicine for her child. David felt sad because he had never worried about such things. He saw a teenage boy named Marcus helping younger kids with homework. Marcus had old clothes but was very kind. Linda told David that Marcus was smart but couldn't afford college and hoped for a scholarship. David thought about how different Marcus's life was from his own because of circumstances beyond his control. On his way home, David saw a rundown apartment building with families and children playing outside. It was very different from his hotel. For the first time, he started to see the strength and struggles of the community. He began to question his old beliefs and understand that life was harder for some people because of unfair systems. The next day, Emily arrived at the community center and saw David deep in thought. Emily walked with David, smiling softly. "Ready for the tour I promised?" she asked. David, usually confident, felt a bit unsure. As they stepped onto the busy streets, Emily started telling her story. "I grew up just a few blocks from here," she said, pointing to a small apartment building. "My mom worked really hard to keep us housed." David looked at the old buildings and the busy people, seeing them differently now. Emily talked about her school, showing a brick building and saying, "We didn't have enough books, so we had to share, but our teachers were great and believed in us." David felt a bit guilty thinking about his own fancy school. They passed a small park where kids played on old swings. "This was my favorite place," Emily said with a happy look. "Even though we didn't have much, we had each other, and the community helped out a lot." David saw how warmly people greeted Emily. Neighbors said hello, and shopkeepers waved. It was very different from the cold way people acted in his luxury hotel world. Emily told stories of neighbors helping each other and community events. David saw how strong and caring the community was. Over time, David got used to working at the community center. He started to feel more connected to the people there. One day, he noticed a boy named Ethan struggling with his math homework. David asked if he needed help and sat with him for an hour. As Ethan began to understand better, David felt a warmth inside, a feeling he had never experienced at his old job. Weeks passed, and David found joy in his time at the center. He learned the names of the volunteers and kids. Maria, a single mother, shared her dream of becoming a nurse, while Darnell, a quiet teenager, revealed his talent for art. During an art class, David sat next to Lisa, an 8-year-old aspiring chef. "I'm going to have my own restaurant one day," she exclaimed while painting. David smiled, telling her he believed in her dream. One day, David overheard 2 volunteers talking. "Have you noticed how different Mr. Anderson is now?" one of them said. "He's really connecting with the kids." The other agreed, noting that it seemed like he had changed. It was at that moment David realized they were right. He had changed. He now cared deeply for the people he worked with. While cleaning up after an art session, he saw Ethan, now 19, crying on the sofa. Though unsure at first, David knew he had to help. David approached Ethan, who was curled up in a corner, crying uncontrollably. The sight of his distress tugged at David's heart. He knelt beside him, feeling completely out of his depth. "Ethan," he said softly, "what's wrong, buddy?" Ethan looked up, tears streaming down his face. "They're going to take my mom away," he managed to say between sobs. David felt a sharp pain in his chest. He remembered overhearing that Ethan's mother had struggled with addiction in the past. He might have judged her harshly before, but now, seeing the pain it was causing Ethan, David felt a deep sense of regret. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," David said, his voice thick with emotion. After a moment of hesitation, he gently put his arm around Ethan's shoulders. To his surprise, Ethan leaned into him, crying even harder. As David held the boy, his own eyes began to well up. He thought about all the times he had dismissed people's struggles, assuming their problems were the result of poor choices. Now, holding this heartbroken boy, he realized how wrong he had been. "It's not fair," Ethan whimpered. "Why can't she just get better?" David took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Sometimes," he said gently, "people have a hard time getting better, even when they really want to. But that doesn't mean your mom doesn't love you, and it doesn't mean you're alone." As he spoke, David realized how much he meant what he was saying. He felt a fierce protectiveness for Ethan and the other kids at the center. These children, once overlooked by him, now meant more to him than he could have ever imagined. As time passed, David spent more and more of his time at the community center. Each interaction with the people there continued to shift his perspective. One evening, as he helped Emily clean up after a particularly busy day, she paused and looked at him thoughtfully. "You know, David," Emily began softly, "I think it's time I shared more of my story with you." David nodded, sensing the importance of the moment. They sat at a small table in the corner of the room, the setting sun casting long shadows. Emily took a deep breath before she spoke. "Growing up, I faced challenges you might never have imagined. From a young age, I learned that the color of my skin often determined how people saw me before they even knew my name." David listened intently, feeling a mix of shame and curiosity. Emily's voice became distant as she recalled her past. "I remember being followed in stores, accused of stealing when I was just looking around. I've been pulled over by police for no reason other than looking suspicious. Even in law school, people assumed I was there because of affirmative action, not because of my hard work or intelligence." David felt a lump form in his throat. He had never considered how deeply these daily indignities could affect someone. Emily's voice grew stronger. "But I didn't let those experiences define me. They only made me more determined to succeed and to help others facing the same struggles." David saw her in a new light. He realized that her strength and compassion weren't just natural traits, but qualities shaped by years of hardship. "Emily, I don't know what to say, David admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I knew racism existed, but I didn't realize how deeply it impacted people's lives every day. Emily gently patted his hand. That's why I'm telling you, David. Understanding comes from listening to each other's stories. David nodded, feeling a profound shift in his worldview. He looked at Emily with newfound respect and admiration, not just for her achievements, but for the journey that brought her there. Over the following weeks, David grew more invested in the lives of the people at the center. He began to notice the small details, the worn-out shoes of a single mother rushing to her second job, the haunted look in a teenager's eyes as he shared his struggles in school. One afternoon, while helping a group of kids with their homework, David had a sudden realization. He saw how his past actions, his prejudices and dismissive attitude had contributed to the very problems these families faced. The weight of this understanding hit him hard, and he had to step out to collect his thoughts. Leaning against the wall in the hallway, his mind raced. He thought of all the times he had turned people away from his hotel based on snap judgments and how he had treated Emily that day. Each memory now felt like a personal failure, a betrayal of basic human decency. As David walked back to the classroom, he started to see the children in a new way. He no longer thought of them as just charity cases or statistics, but as real kids with their own dreams and hopes. He cared about their progress, celebrated their small wins, and felt sad when they were disappointed, almost like they were his own family. This new feeling made him rethink everything he used to believe about success and who deserved to be in fancy places like his hotel. He used to think that only the best and richest people should stay at his hotel, but now he saw that the real value was in making connections with people. One day, as David was leaving the community center, he overheard volunteers talking about how hard it was to find affordable homes. David realized that his hotel's policies might be making it harder for people to find homes in the area. This made him think hard about his life and job, and he started feeling a strong sense of responsibility to make things better. One cold autumn afternoon, the center's old heating system broke down and the building became very cold. Mrs. Thompson, the center's director, was stressed trying to find someone to fix it quickly and affordably. David overheard her and decided to help. He used his hotel experience to call a repair service he knew and got them to come quickly. While they fixed the heater, David helped by setting up warm drink stations, giving out blankets, and organizing activities to keep everyone warm. He even gave his coat to a shivering girl, and she looked up at him with gratitude. When the heater was finally fixed, the children, volunteers, and staff were very thankful. Mrs. Thompson thanked David with tears in her eyes, saying his help meant a lot to everyone. David felt a happiness he'd never felt before in his job. He realized that being a real leader wasn't about showing off or following rules, but about caring for others and using your skills to help. This made David feel like he was becoming a different, better person. David, who had treated Emily badly at the hotel, felt like a different person now. After visiting the community center, he wanted to change and do good. When he drove home, he thought of new ideas. He no longer saw his hotel job as just a way to be important. Instead, he saw it as a chance to help people. The next morning, David came to the hotel with a new goal. He went straight to a meeting where they were talking about his suspension. He knocked on the door and walked in. "I have an idea," David said firmly. The people in the meeting looked surprised and curious. David took a deep breath and shared his plan. He wanted the hotel to work with the community center to offer job training and jobs for kids who needed help. "We can make a real difference," he said excitedly. "We can help people who have never had these chances before." He explained that hotel workers could teach kids who wanted to work in hotels. David was enthusiastic, and soon the board members were interested. They saw the good in his idea and agreed to it. David was excited and couldn't wait to tell Emily and the community center team. As he left the meeting, he knew this was just the start of his new mission. David walked into the hotel lobby feeling nervous but determined. The smell of fresh flowers and polished wood was familiar, but everything felt different now. He straightened his tie and noticed people watching him. Laura, the front desk manager, gave him a small, unsure smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Anderson," she said softly. "Thank you, Laura," David replied, feeling warmer than before. He could tell she was unsure of him, and he knew he had to earn back her trust. As he walked to his office, he overheard guests talking about him. They wondered if he had really changed. David took a deep breath, knowing his actions would show if he had changed. In his office, everything was as he left it, but it felt different. The awards on the wall seemed unimportant now. David realized that real success was about helping others, not just getting awards. A knock on the door interrupted him. It was Tom, one of the bellhops. Tom said, "The staff wants to know what's going on. Can you talk to us?" David agreed and asked Tom to gather everyone in the main conference room in an hour. He knew it was important to be honest with his team. As Tom left, David sat at his desk, ready to face the challenge ahead. For the first time, he felt ready to be open and honest with his team. In the conference room, David stood at the front, holding the podium. The room was full of hotel staff, reporters, and community leaders. Cameras flashed and people whispered. David took a deep breath and got ready for an important moment. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice shaking a little. "I called this meeting to talk about my mistakes and how I want to change the Oak D Hotel." He looked at the crowd. Some people seemed unsure while others were interested. Emily Parker, sitting in the back, gave him a thumbs up. "I'm really sorry," David continued, his voice getting steadier. "I was wrong to treat Emily Parker badly. I was unfair and didn't understand. This isn't what our hotel should be about." His eyes started to fill with tears, but he kept going. "I've been helping out at a community center, and it showed me how much hurt discrimination causes. I've learned a lot and want to do better." David shared his plan for the hotel. "From now on, we'll train all our staff to be more inclusive. We'll work with local groups to help people get jobs, and we'll review our rules to make sure everyone is treated equally." He looked into the cameras. "To M. Williams and everyone who's felt mistreated at our hotel, I'm really sorry. I can't change the past, but I promise to make the Oak D a place where everyone feels welcome and respected." After he finished, the room was quiet. Then, people started clapping. David saw some staff members crying and others nodding in approval. He stepped away from the podium, feeling tired but hopeful. This was just the start of a long journey, but he felt ready to face it. In the weeks that followed, David worked hard to make the Oak Ridge Hotel better. He knew that talking wasn't enough. He needed to act. He started by having meetings with Emily and other community leaders. They looked at the hotel's rules and practices. "We need to make sure these changes are real," Emily said, reading a document. "We need to create real chances and include everyone." David agreed. "What about starting a mentorship program for young people from underserved communities?" They talked about new ideas like changing hiring practices and working with local minority-owned businesses. David listened carefully to every suggestion. As time went on, the hotel changed. New staff members joined, bringing new ideas. David made an effort to know each new worker and understand their experiences. One day, David watched a group of high school students from the community center tour the hotel. They were part of a new program to show them hotel jobs. "This could be you one day," a guide said. The students looked excited, and David felt happy. This was what real change looked like. But not everyone liked the new direction. Some old employees complained, and a few regular guests were unhappy. Mr. Anderson, a longtime guest, said to David, "I've been coming here for 30 years. I'm not sure about all these changes." David took a deep breath and replied, "Change can be hard, but I think these changes will make our hotel better and more welcoming. I hope you'll give it a chance." Despite the challenges, David stayed committed to his new path. He worked long hours, met with community groups, revised rules, and made sure the hotel truly showed its new commitment to diversity and inclusion. As the weeks went by, David thought of new ideas for the Oak Ridge Hotel. He wanted to make the hotel and the community center, which had helped him, work together better. One sunny morning, David asked Emily to meet him at the hotel. They sat in his office looking out at the city. "Emily, I have an exciting idea," David said. "What if we make a partnership between the hotel and the community center?" Emily's face lit up. "That sounds great, David. What do you have in mind?" David leaned forward and said, "I want to start a program to help young people learn about jobs in the hotel. We could teach them how to work in hospitality and customer service." Emily agreed. "That could help so many people." They spent hours planning the program. They decided to start with 10 young people from the community center. They would learn in classes at the center and then practice at the hotel. When they told the hotel staff and the community center about the new program, everyone was happy. A few weeks later, the first group of young people came to the hotel, nervous but excited. David welcomed each one, saying, "Welcome to the Oak Ridge Hotel. This is more than just a job. It's a chance to build a career and show what you can do." David and Emily worked hard to make the program work. Some trainees found the job hard and needed extra help, but they started to do well as time went on. The hotel staff helped by teaching them and felt proud of their new roles. But not everyone at the hotel was happy with the changes. Some staff members and regular guests were upset. One day, David overheard two guests talking about how the hotel felt different. They missed the old way things were. David felt sad, but remembered why he started the program. He went to the guests and said, "Good morning. I heard you're not happy with the changes. Can you tell me more?" The guests were surprised. One said, "We've been coming here for years. We don't like all these new people." David replied, "I know change is hard, but I think these changes are good for the hotel. Would you like to meet some of our new staff? I think you'll like them." The guests agreed to meet Liam, one of the young trainees who had done really well. The guests seemed to like Liam a bit more after meeting him. Later, during a staff meeting, Laura, a longtime employee, shared her worries. "David, some of our important guests say the hotel doesn't feel as special anymore. I'm worried about our reputation." David looked around at his team and said, "I understand these changes might be hard, but remember, our job is to give great service to everyone, no matter who they are. The young people we're training are bringing new energy and ideas. Isn't that what we want, to be the best?" As David kept having problems, he started to doubt his decisions. The changes he made felt really heavy on him. Just when he thought he might give up, a surprising friend came to help. One afternoon, while David was handling another complaint, he saw Mr. Harrison walking confidently through the hotel lobby. Mr. Harrison was a famous and important person, and his presence caught everyone's attention. David felt a mix of hope and worry. Mr. Harrison walked up to David with a big smile and said, "David, I've heard about the great changes you're making here. I'm really impressed." David was surprised and said, "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. It's been tough." Mr. Harrison then said loudly, "Change is never easy, but it's important. You're doing the right thing." As Mr. Harrison spoke, people started gathering around them. Mr. Harrison saw this and raised his voice even more. "Everyone," he announced, "what's happening here at Oak Ridge is amazing. David Harrison is setting an example for the whole hotel industry. This hotel isn't just about luxury anymore. It's giving people chances and changing lives. That's the kind of place I want to support." The room went quiet as Mr. Harrison's words sank in. Then people started clapping. The applause grew louder and filled the whole lobby. David felt overwhelmed by this sudden support. He saw Laura, the worker who had been doubtful, nodding in approval. He noticed the regular guests who had complained earlier were now talking quietly and seemed happier. Mr. Harrison put a hand on David's shoulder and said softly, "Keep going. You're making a difference." David then went to his office and looked out the window at the busy city. He thought about how he used to be very strict and narrow-minded. He smiled as he realized how much he had changed. He thought about the community center and the kids he had helped, especially Liam. He remembered how kind Emily had been even when he was initially unfair. David saw a photo on his desk from the community center. It showed happy faces, including his own, and reminded him of the connections he had made. He picked up the photo and said to himself, "I never thought I'd find so much joy in a place I used to look down on." The sounds of laughter from the lobby came into his office. There were new employees hired through the program he started with Emily. Their presence reminded him of the positive changes he had made. David put the photo back, adjusted his tie, and felt a warm feeling in his chest. He realized that the hotel was no longer just a business to him, but a place where he could really help people. As David prepared to leave his office for a meeting, he felt a sense of responsibility, but was excited instead of worried. He said quietly to himself, "We're just getting started," with a determined look in his eye. David walked out of his office ready to handle any challenges and make Oak Ridge Hotel a better place. The grand ballroom at Oak Ridge Hotel was full of energy. Colorful balloons and streamers decorated the room, and a big banner said, "Congratulations, graduates." David stood at the back of the room, watching people come in for the graduation ceremony of the first class from the hotel's job training program. He saw familiar faces from the community center, hotel staff, and local leaders. Emily Parker, looking beautiful in a blue dress, came over to David with a proud smile. "Can you believe it, David? Look at all these people here for our graduates," she said, hugging his arm. David nodded, feeling emotional. "It's amazing," he managed to say. The ceremony started, and David took his place on the stage. As David looked out at all the happy faces, he saw hope and determination in the eyes of the graduates. These were people who had been given a chance and took it with both hands. One by one, the graduates walked across the stage to get their certificates. David shook each hand, feeling happy every time someone smiled and said thank you. He remembered their stories: single moms, former gang members, high school dropouts. Now they were ready for new jobs. When Ethan, the black teenager who had touched David's heart, stepped onto the stage, David started to cry. Ethan had grown into a confident young man, and his big smile made David happy. As the last graduate left the stage, everyone clapped loudly. David looked out at the crowd and felt joy and pride from everyone. He saw family members crying, heard friends cheering, and felt the strong sense of accomplishment in the room. David realized that what they had done was more than just job training. It was about changing lives, opening doors, and building a community. The Oak Ridge Hotel had become a place of hope and opportunity. David stood at the podium, feeling thankful and purposeful. The clapping had stopped, but the room was still full of energy. He looked out at the crowd, each person reminding him of their journey. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice warm and steady. "When we started this program, I never imagined it would have such a big impact, not just on our graduates, but on all of us at the Oak Ridge Hotel and on me personally." He paused, looking at Emily in the crowd. She nodded, and he continued, "This journey has taught me about second chances, the strength of community, and seeing the potential in every person." As David spoke, he felt respect and admiration from everyone around him. He was no longer the cold, prejudiced hotel manager. He had become someone who cared about making a difference. After the ceremony, David and Emily were surrounded by people who wanted to congratulate them. Local business owners wanted to know how to start similar programs, and other hotel managers who had once doubted David now asked for his advice. Emily pulled David aside and said, "What we've done here doesn't have to stop at the Oak Ridge. We could help other businesses do the same." David's eyes lit up with excitement. "You're right," he said. "We could make a guide and offer help to others. We could change the whole industry." Over the next few months, David and Emily worked hard to expand their program. They reached out to other hotels, restaurants, and businesses, held workshops, and shared their experiences. The community embraced David's change. He was no longer just a hotel manager, but a beloved figure known for his kindness and commitment to making a difference. Children from the community center waved to him, and former program graduates came by the hotel to share their successes. As the sun set on another busy day at the Oak Ridge Hotel, the grand ballroom was full of excitement. The space, once a symbol of exclusivity, was now filled with a diverse crowd of guests, staff, and community members. They had all come to celebrate the hotel's one-year anniversary. David stood near the entrance, greeting people with warm handshakes and smiles. He marveled at how much had changed in just a year. The hotel lobby, once cold and unwelcoming, now felt friendly to everyone who walked in. Emily joined him, looking proud. "Look at what we've done," she said, pointing to the crowd. David nodded, tears in his eyes. "It's more than I ever dreamed." Mr. Harrison took the stage and started speaking. He talked about the incident from a year ago that had made him sad, but now he felt hope and joy. He praised David's transformation and Emily's belief in second chances. When Mr. Harrison finished, he invited David and Emily onto the stage. The applause was loud as they went forward. David took the microphone, his voice emotional. "This hotel has always been about hospitality," he said. "But now we understand that true hospitality means welcoming everyone with open arms and open hearts." He turned to Emily, holding her hand. None of this would have been possible without Emily's compassion and guidance. She saw the chance for change when I couldn't see it myself. Emily squeezed his hand and said, "And none of it would have happened if David hadn't been willing to learn and grow. This is what can happen when we choose to see the humanity in each other." They looked out at the crowd and saw people from all walks of life. Hotel staff stood with community volunteers, business leaders talked with program graduates, and children from the after-school program played together. The Oak Ridge Hotel had become more than just a place to stay. It was a beacon of hope, showing what could be achieved when people came together with open minds and hearts. If you were publicly humiliated like Emily, would you forgive the person who did it? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to my channel. I spend a lot of time writing these heartwarming stories for you, and your support means a lot to me.